Evening, all learners out here. So today I'm taking the recall questions. Okay, so this is the recall questions of the FMG examination. And let me tell you that most of the topics, rather all of the topics which have been in the form of MCQ were covered in your theory questions. They were also covered on the YouTube which we had taken, right? So even they were covered with the YouTube session also which I had taken. So let me know whether I'm audible, visible, so that we can just start it ASAP if you all are ready. Okay. So uh, so I've taken this recall with whatever questions students have given me. But if you think that ma'am the options were different, or if you know that ma'am this was the question or there were another questions, you can always put the comment in the comment box. Right now, let us start with the first MCQ. The MCQ saying that the thyroid hormone, okay, the thyroid hormone acts via which type of receptor? Whether it is cytoplasmic, whether it is tyrosine kinase, whether it is nuclear, or whether it is G protein coupled receptor. Yes, anybody would like to give the answer for this? Which type of receptor do you think the thyroid hormone has? Yes, any answers? Any of the answers? So, how to get into this question and study it in a form that always you will remember this. So, you just need not remember thyroid this, thyroid that. How to remember this? Iska correct answer is nuclear, right? Nuclear receptor, beta. Nuclear, Renu and Thamolika. Beta, it's nuclear. See, especially your T3. Why it is T3? Because it is the hormone that is going to act on the target cells. The T3 is the active form which is going to act on the target cells. T4 gets connected to T3 by the peripheral deiodinases which are present. Okay, by the peripheral deiodinases which are present, it is going to get connected to T3. Now, this T3 will enter because it is lipid soluble. So, why it is entering? Because it is lipid soluble, right? This is something very important, and it is going to bind to the hormone receptor, which is intranuclear. This hormone receptor complex binds to the hormone response element, and hormone response element ultimately is going to bring about activation, and again gene transcription, translation, new protein synthesis, and finally leading to the actions of the thyroid hormone. So this is about the thyroid hormone, that it has got nuclear receptors. Which other has got nuclear receptors? So let me tell you that even estrogens have got nuclear receptors. So apart from T3, also estrogens have got nuclear receptor. Now, a very there is a traditional way of classification of hormones. Like you can classify them as the protein hormones. You can classify them as those which are formed from steroids, that is having a common precursor, that is cholesterol. And the third way, those which are formed from the amino acid tyrosine. Amino acid tyrosine. This is the traditional way of classification of hormones. Amino acid tyrosine is catecholamines. Okay, they are basically your catecholamines, and they are your thyroid hormones. And protein ka yaad rakho, PPP, that is the hormones which are coming from the pituitary, pancreas, and the parathormone. Okay, so these are the hormones which are the protein hormones. Now, this is one way of classification. Another very essential way by which you can classify them is the steroid and the amino acid tyrosine group of hormones. These are the hormones which are taken as type 1, and the protein hormones are taken as type 2, right? Type 1 and type 2. So once you know it is type 1, this is type 2. Type 1 are lipid soluble, right? They are lipid soluble, and the type 2 are water soluble. So because they are lipid soluble, they can easily cross the cell membrane, and therefore they will have intra cellular receptors. So the intracellular receptors, they can either be your intranuclear, or they can be intracytoplasmic. Now these are protein bound, okay? They are very much bounded to proteins, and because they are protein bounded, their half life is much more. So this is very, very important to be known, that they are intracellular, having receptors, they are protein bound, so having a half life period is very long. Water soluble जो होते हैं, they are water soluble, that means they are lipid insoluble, and therefore their receptors will be on the cell membrane. Their receptors will be on the cell membrane. They are not protein bound, right? They are not protein bound, and they have got a comparatively short half life. They can have a short half life of even minutes, right? Not even hours, even minutes. And these type 2 hormones, okay, these type 2 hormones, that is the water soluble hormones which we have seen, the type 2 hormones or the water soluble hormones, they act through G protein. So the type 2 hormones which we have classified as water soluble, which have receptors on the cell membrane, they act through second messengers. For example, they can act through cyclic AMP, cyclic GMP, they can act through IP3DAG, or they can be enzyme linked. So if you remember, enzyme linked, there was a question on tyrosine kinase. So tyrosine kinase was related to insulin, to your nerve growth factor, to your leptin, and Janus kinase, which is also called as JAK-STAT, growth hormone, and prolactin. Got this clear? So always I tell you, that hormones का जो general वाला part होता है, general वाला part of the endocrines is very, very important. The general classification and the hormones where they act, I mean the receptors, is very important. Now jump on to the next question. A person who is recently at high altitude does not show which of the, okay, or you can say show which of the following, does show which of the following features: polycythemia, reduced hemoglobin, increased myoglobin, and hypoventilation. The options could be different. I just got it as a recall, so if you think that, ma'am, the options are different, you can let me. No. So a person staying at high altitude shows which of the following? Yes, very good. Renu and Amna. So correct answer by Renu. Yes, it is polycythemia. Now, when you speak of high altitude, what are the points that you must remember? As we move at high altitude, there is a decrease in the barometric pressure. So as there is a decrease in the barometric pressure, the percent fraction of oxygen in the dry air will be constant, that is 21%. But the partial pressure of oxygen keeps on decreasing. So this decrease in the partial pressure of oxygen is responsible for the symptoms at high altitude. इसमें भी the safe partial pressure is partial pressure of oxygen 60 mmHg, because at 60 mmHg the person's saturation of oxygen with hemoglobin is 90%. This is possible with an ascent of 10 to 12,000 feet. 10 to 12,000 feet. So up till 10 to 12,000 feet is the safe ascent where the partial pressure is 60 and the person's saturation is 90 and there will be no symptom of hypoxia. But if the person goes beyond that, then he's going to get the first symptom, and the first symptom of high altitude. The first symptom of high altitude will be hyperventilation, because he is going to develop what we called as hypoxic hypoxia. Okay, he is going to develop hypoxic hypoxia. Now, you might have heard that there can be acute mountain sickness. This acute mountain sickness, which starts from about 48 hours of just descent, and it may just wear off within 3 to 4 days. Okay, it may wane off within 3 to 4 days. But sometimes it can be high altitude pulmonary edema, or it can be high altitude cerebral edema. Okay, this is the dangerous thing which can occur, or life threatening thing which can occur with high altitude. And finally, what are the adaptive changes that take place at high altitude? All these adaptive changes are because of hypoxia. So this excess of hypoxia increases the production of erythropoietin from the kidneys, which is going to increase your RBC content. The oxygen hemoglobin dissociation curve shows a right shift. Now, due to hyperventilation, what is happening? There is respiratory alkalosis, because there is a CO2 wash out, right? There is a CO2 wash out. This is going to be compensated by passing an alkaline urine. So this again becomes important. Okay, alkaline urine and passage of a respiratory alkalosis, carbon dioxide washout, and the kidney was okay, Archana. Okay, whatever it is, but understanding the theory becomes more important, Archana. Understanding the theory better. Okay, thank you for rectification. Thank you. Apart from this, there are various, hypoxia inducible factors that are released. Hypoxia inducible factors that are released. There is increase, there is increase even in the capillary density at the cellular level. There's also going to be increase in the capillary density. All of them to compensate the changes or which will take place at high altitude, right? Now, next. Which of the following has GLUT2? Which of the following has GLUT2? Anybody with options? Yes. GLUT2 is present in kidney, intestine, liver, or brain. So GLUT2 is present GLUT2 is present in kidneys. GLUT2 is present in kidneys. GLUT1 is present in intestine. Now, if you look that, one of the very, very important question is glucose reabsorption. This topic over glucose reabsorption is also very, very repeatedly asked in NEET PG. Glucose reabsorption is by two ways. It is active and it is passive. Passive is GLUTs, G-L-U-T, GLUTs, which are example of facilitated diffusion. Okay, so GLUTs are example of facilitated diffusion. That means no energy. Active includes SGLT, that is secondary glucose or secondary glucose co-transport, which is occurring in the form of sodium and glucose. So this SGLT1 I told you is in the intestine, and the SGLT2 is in the PCT, or that is in the kidney. That means glucose reabsorption is both active and passive. Now, next point to be remembered, that intestines and kidney, these sites do not need insulin, do not need insulin for glucose uptake. They do not need insulin for glucose uptake. So you can remember that GLUT4, GLUT4 is called as insulin dependent GLUT, which is present in your muscles and in your adipose tissue, right? Which is present in the muscles and in the adipose tissue. So glucose से related and even related to your insulin, there are very repeated questions. So glucose reabsorption को बहुत अच्छे से पढ़ना चाहिए. Next one. An IV irritant was given which results bradycardia, hypotension, apnea. This patient is representing which of the following reflex? Bizzole-Jarisch reflex, Bainbridge reflex, Cushing reflex, or none of them. So this reflex is also called as a coronary chemoreflex. It is also called as coronary chemoreflex, which occurs with activation by certain chemicals like serotonin. So serotonin pe separately there was question. It can also occur with capsaicin and with veratridine. So when these chemicals are injected or they come in contact, especially with the left ventricle, they result in what is the coronary chemoreflex or the Bizzole-Jarisch reflex, resulting in bradycardia and hypotension, apnea. Okay, bradycardia, apnea, hypotension. Sometimes there can be even bronchoconstriction with this. On the other hand, what is the Bainbridge reflex? What is the Bainbridge reflex? So Bainbridge reflex is very simple. Whenever there is an increase in the venous return to the heart, okay, whenever there is an increase in the venous return to the heart, there is going to be stretching, especially of the SA node, and it causes an increase in the heart rate. So increase in the venous return to the heart increases the heart rate. Increase in the venous return to the heart increases the heart rate. As simple as such. Remember that this is the Bainbridge reflex, right? Now, the next one was, what is the Cushing reflex? What is the Cushing reflex? You must remember that it is, the Cushing reflex occurs whenever there is an increase in the intracranial tension. For example, there is a tumor. So whenever there is an increase in the intracranial tension, what occurs is there is a compression of the cerebral microvasculature. There is a compression of the cerebral microvasculature. So it gets compressed. So this compression results in hypoxia, especially of the vasomotor center. And if you remember that if there is a very profound hypoxia of the vasomotor center, it causes a very strong sympathetic drive, which actually causes increase in the blood pressure. And now whenever there is an increase in the blood pressure, what will happen? Whenever there is an increase in the blood pressure, what will happen? The increase in the blood pressure will cause activation of the baroreceptors, and this activation of the baroreceptors will actually decrease the blood pressure. And when they are decreasing the blood pressure, There will be also a decrease in the heart rate. So increase in the intracranial tension will always be associated with bradycardia. You also get this MCQ. So इसमें आप देखो क्या हो रहा है. Just try to understand this and don't confuse this with the CNS ischemic response. Okay? Compression of the cerebral microvasculature is going to cause a strong stimulation of the vasomotor center, and through the CNS ischemic response, the blood pressure will rise. But because your baroreceptors are active, okay, because your baroreceptors are active, they could sense that the blood pressure has been profoundly increased, and they will bring about a decrease in the blood pressure, and the heart rate will also decrease. So Cushing reflex is that whenever there is raised intracranial tension or a raised ICT, there has to be bradycardia. So remember this very well. Don't confuse this with the CNS ischemic response, which is also called as the last ditch sand or the last ditch sand, which will bring about a very sharp and acute rise of blood pressure through activation of the baroreceptors. Activation of the sympathetics. Next one. Again, this question has been repeatedly asked with NEET PG, and I myself have taken this topic in the theory. Also, I have taken this number of times in your YouTube sessions. Now, this is a particular graph which shows a plateau, and the question says that this plateau is representing which property? Elasticity, plasticity, contractility, or none of them? Yes, who would like to come up with the correct answer? Very good. Renu has given the first correct answer. Good, Renu. Yes. So this is showing a feature of plasticity. Now, what is this? This is a cystometrogram. Okay, it is a cystometrogram where on the x-axis you take volume and on the y-axis you take pressure. Pressure. No, Ajju, it's not C, beta. It's not C. It is a property of the smooth muscles. And we are speaking over here about bladder and its smooth muscle, that is detrusor. So it is not showing contractility. It is showing plasticity, which is a feature of smooth muscles. Is it clear? Now, why do you get this plateau and what is this plasticity? Smooth muscles, they exhibit a property of plasticity. This property means that they can develop active tension. They can develop active tension at any given length of sarcomere. At any given length of sarcomere. If you compare this to your striated muscles, that is your skeletal and the cardiac, they are going to show optimum tension only at an optimum length of the sarcomere, which is 2 to 2.5 microns. But this type of, this type of strictness of the length of the sarcomere is not followed by smooth muscles. They do not follow this. They follow plasticity. That is, they can develop active tension at any length. This plateau, what does it reflect? See, when there is an increase in the volume, okay, when there is an increase in the volume, so initially with a small increase in the volume, there is a small rise in pressure. So when the volume increases to about 50 ml, right, when the volume increases to about 50 ml, there is a sharp acute rise in the pressure. But as you keep on increasing the volume, the pressure does not rise. It attains a plateau. And again, a pressure is going to be developed when the urine volume is 400 ml. And this is the point where the maturation reflex begins. That means now the person has to go to the go for the nature's call. So a small volume of urine resulted an increase in the pressure, right? but the bladder accommodated without further increase in the pressure. So this accommodation is the property of the smooth muscles, and this property is the plasticity, which is explained by the law of Laplace. This property is explained by the law of Laplace, which says that T is equal to P into R, where T is the tension, R is the radius, and P is the distending pressure. Okay, P is the distending pressure. Now, this law of Laplace enables the smooth muscle to accommodate large volumes without increase in pressure. Right? So this is actually what is helping in a phenomenon that is called as receptive relaxation. And this receptive relaxation is also shown by stomach, right? So when there is an increase in R, what do you mean by that? That whenever there is an increase in the volume in the bladder, that means there is increased accumulation of urine in the bladder, the volume increases. That is, the R is increasing. So when there is an increase in the R, there is going to be a rise in the tension, which will prevent the pressure to increase. Okay, so the simultaneous increase in the R is brought about by increase in the tension, which prevents the pressure, the distending pressure, to rise. So the pressure does not rise. Because of this, the person is able to hold urine even up to a volume of 400 ml. But again, at 400 ml, now there will be onset of the maturation reflex, and you will have to go for the nature's call. Right? So smooth muscles, they exhibit a very important property, that is plasticity. They do not follow a very strict length tension relationship, which is shown by the striated muscles. One of the important reasons is that if you consider the proportion of actin to myosin, it is about 2:1 in the skeletal muscles, or in the, you can say, in the striated muscles. But in the smooth muscles, okay, in the smooth muscles, this actin can be about 12 times more than myosin. So at any given length, myosin always have got actin to bind, and there is no proper horizontal alignation of sarcomere. ऐसे alignment नहीं है sarcomere की. They are in any direction. So at any length, myosin can bind to actin, and therefore they do not show a very strict length tension relationship. So remember, smooth muscle plasticity helps in accommodative relaxation. They can accommodate, they can show a receptive relaxation, and they follow the law of Laplace, which is T is equal to P into R. Is it clear? Were there any other questions? Because I got only these much. If you think that there were any more questions, you can add on in the comment box and we can discuss that also. Meanwhile, remember that the iconic subscriptions of Unacademy, they are showing a 5% discount, so you can share. And we are up with the NEET PG Vitals, that is, we have got a recorded session, which is 800 hours of recorded session, where we are completing all the 19 subjects. So it's a very good subscription, and the teaching is very good, and at the end of each session we have taken MCQs for your revision. So this is all today from Dr. Reena. If you have got anything to add on, you are always free to join. And please let me know if there is any special topic you want to study, so we will take that also, like cardiac cycle, or it could be a counter current mechanism, whatever. It could be MCQs. So just add on to your suggestions. So thank you all, and God bless you.